Hello there, and welcome back. Today I will carry on with the narration of the teen fanfiction that I wrote. For those of you that prefer to read it, the links are in the description. You may pick the platform of your choice. For those of you that prefer listening, here we go. Don't forget to leave a like if you, like the video. And subscribe if you want to see more of my content. Chapter 6. The creepy robotic voice uttering those words found its way to Lydia Martin's ears. She froze as a sense of dread filled her. She knew that voice all too well. How could she ever forget it? It tormented her for months to no end. Her friends, her town that they fought tooth and nail to keep from harm. She stood in place, but what place? The only thing she could feel was the cold hard concrete underneath her bare feet. There was nothing in sight distinguishable to her eyes at least. Everything around her was masked behind a thick layer of fog as white as the dress she was wearing. She slowly but finally took a few steps forward, turning left and right, trying her best to scrutinize her surroundings for any clues regarding that location. After a minute of walking through empty land, she started to get impatient when she realized she wasn't making any progress. Impatience gradually turning into panic, Lydia picked up her own pace and began running, with seemingly no purpose. She halted to take a breath. She revolved around herself clockwise and counterclockwise, as if she was expecting or hoping for something new to happen each time, only for her to understand that she was nowhere near figuring it out, nowhere near getting out, and she heard it again. His voice, the surgeon's voice. Her breathing accelerated, and soon after turned to hyperventilation. This can't be, she muttered to herself, tears ready to fall. He said again. At that point, nothing made sense. He was dead. The three of them were dead. The dread doctors were dead. So why was she having a vision about them? It rings a bell, doesn't it? Lydia jumped, instantly flipped around, understandably taken aback, to make eye contact with the young woman that spoke seconds before. She stood at just about 7 feet away from her, a sincere, beautiful smile across the face. Who are you? Lydia wasted no time in pleasantries. The woman slightly tilted her head to the side, then her lips moved. I'm just like you, Lydia. The unmistakable look of confusion she received in response told it all. She needed to give more than that. Right, let's not beat around the bush too long. You heard their voice, didn't you? Yes, but it's impossible. The stranger cut her off to finish her sentence for her. You watched the beast rip their heads off. Yes, don't worry, there is no doubt. They are really very much dead, she reassured her. The strawberry blonde-haired girl noticed that both their dresses were identical, except for a large blood stain around the abdomen area of the woman. She was injured, and badly by the look of it. She brought her gaze back up to lock eyes with her again. What happened? What's happening? What's this place? Well, you are a banshee. You are having a banshee premonition of what's coming. Lydia stepped towards her and stopped a few inches away. She was again beginning to feel impatient. For all she said, she still didn't give any solid information. Okay, can you be a tad bit more specific here? I mean, if the dread doctors are really dead, then why are we hearing them? And why am I having a premonition of nowhere? Make it make sense. She didn't wait long for an answer. It came immediately. It's not about them. Not directly, at least. It's something that came from them. And this place is a starting point. To what? The first place you need to look at upon arriving to Beacon Hills. At first, Lydia was getting ready to ask how she knew they were coming back to Beacon Hills, but then she remembered that the woman was also a banshee. Well, according to her own words, at least. Then a better question popped in her head. What place? I keep asking you about this place. We are in the middle of nowhere. She noted the movement of the stranger's irises. She was no longer looking directly at her. Her eyes stopped a little above Lydia's shoulders, indicating she was looking at something behind her. She raised both eyebrows and lifted her head to further point behind. Lydia finally turned around to see it. But that's... Yes, it's the basement where Belasco broke out of the wall. The same basement where you found Liam and Hayden when they were taken. Lydia's eyes fell to the ground to let the information sink in. That was the place to start with. It was all confusing. You will find exactly what you are looking for there, the woman said. Her voice cut for a few seconds, then she added, "Oh, and if the Hellhound doesn't find me, I'll count on you to do so. Trust me, you will need me for what's coming." Lydia's puzzled face steadily pivoted. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be said. Her quizzing expression communicated her thoughts perfectly. Both women looked down at the bloodstain that seemed to be getting larger by the second. They gazed back at each other again, one with obvious worrisome. The other displayed a sorry expression. "I have to go now. I can't stay any longer." "Wait, who are you? What's your name? Where can we find you?" Lydia had grabbed the woman by the wrists. She did open her mouth, but only one word was heard. "Mei-Li." "Mei-Li?" Another voice asked out of nowhere. A muffled, far-sounding voice. But a familiar one, for sure. It was Stiles' voice. Stiles? Lydia opened her eyes to find her boyfriend sitting next to her in the bus, his face turned in her direction, with a visible interrogative expression. She realized she had just awoken from slumber. The foggy Neverland was all a dream. Of course, she knew it was more than a simple one. She wasn't that lucky to get a boring normal dream. She still wasn't very sure what it held. But she was sure of one thing. Whatever it was, something told her she wasn't going to be happy about it. None of them were going to be. Chapter 7. Reminiscence. The prevalent atmosphere in the bus was rather dreary, reasonably comprehensible considering Lydia told them all about her dream. Not that they expected it, but at that point in their lives, they've learned not to be too surprised by anything. In fact, it would seem almost delusional on their parts to assume that nothing worse than the hunters would come after them. Stiles clenched his fists thinking about this god-awful new threat awaiting them back in their town. After nearly 3 years, that was what they were coming home to. He pulled his eyes away from the road in front of him to take a glance at his girlfriend sitting beside him. She was resting her head on the seat, watching the night as the street lights went by. She seemed pensive, just like every other soul on that vehicle. He thought he must have looked at her for too long, because she smiled at his reflection on the window glass when she noticed. Then she turned to face him. "What's on your mind?" Her soft voice turned the volume of his screaming thoughts down, allowing a way out for the questions he really wanted to ask. "Not that I've always been the most optimistic member of the pack, but I just can't stop thinking. What could essentially be worse than a monster who incapacitates his enemies with nothing more than their fear?" and I'm not going to forget the Medusa effect on anyone that looks straight in his eyes. Can't shake that thought either, but whatever it is, for once it seems like we have a clue as to where to start. Yes, according to the Banshee, whom we didn't know existed before today. Lydia slightly frowned at his last statement. Even though she understood what he was reaching for, she definitely wanted to hear more about it. You think she's lying? I'm just saying we shouldn't hold our breaths. Last time we trusted another Banshee, things almost didn't end well for any of us. Stiles was, of course, referring to the Banshee named Meredith, who turned out to be a criminal mastermind after seeming like nothing more than a lost cause, overwhelmed by her own powers. Even though she wasn't an evil person, in the end, a lot of people lost their lives because of her, and nothing could ever change that fact. We don't have to trust her. I just need to know that what I saw and heard wasn't hocus pocus, that's all. Yeah, well, if she was an enemy, it does look like we are walking right into her trap. No, I have this inexplicable feeling that our location doesn't matter. Wherever we go, it'll affect us. It'll affect all of us. Stiles learned to never question Lydia whenever she spoke in that tone. It went beyond rational. It made sense without making sense. Something supernatural that will affect them regardless of their location. Couldn't even begin with the possibilities. The voice brought him back out of it again. Well, whatever it is, I am just glad that for once we didn't cause or attract it. I can be proud of that at least, she said in an almost tearful tone as she leaned onto her boyfriend, put her hand on his, and closed her eyes. He flipped his hand around to hold hers as well. He placed a delicate kiss on her head before shutting his eyes along with hers. Malia was leaning on Scott's chest, both feet up on the seat. He'd wrapped his arms around her and rested his chin on her head. The pair of them were facing the window, and even though the sky was clouded, they could, from time to time, catch a glimpse of a star in between the gaps. Quite ironically, the peaceful moment they were having felt exactly like those stars, that against all odds and efforts to keep them concealed, managed to shine through the darkness. In all the chaos running their lives, they still found a way to steal a minute for themselves occasionally. Granted, it wasn't much, but it was enough for the time being. Malia took a deep breath and broke their silence. How bad do you think it's about to get? Well, personally, I was wondering how quickly it was going to go up from bad to awful, but I couldn't come up with an answer to that either. Very comforting. Scott chuckled at the sarcasm of his girlfriend. Her eyes lingered up towards him to meet his gaze. I mean, do you think we will ever get to just stop and live? The sorry look on his face was enough of an answer to her question. She brought her attention back to the night sky. I don't know how or even if I can answer that question anymore. Things had been snowballing ever since the night he was bitten and turned into a werewolf. Actually, and to that day, it still didn't seem to be slowing down. Scott realized very early on, with the help of his loyal friend Stiles, that he had the potential to make great change with the powers that he'd gained after that night in the woods. He made it his responsibility, moreover his priority, to protect and save his friends, as well as all the innocent souls that crossed his path. Countless times he'd blamed himself for the life that his close circle of friends and family were leading. Yet they never failed to remind him that they chose to follow him. Not just that, but they insisted on it. They took it upon themselves to make his cause their own. It didn't matter the amount of danger and torment they had to go through. They learned the disclaimer by heart a long time ago. It didn't matter where he'd lead them, because they would follow. They trusted him with every ounce of their being. He had always made up for any disappointment he'd caused. In return, he could never express how grateful he was to have them enough. Without them, he'd be nothing, and without him, well, they didn't dare to think where they would be and what their lives would look like, or if they'd even still be alive. Liam wasn't sharing the double seat with anyone, so he decided to rest his legs on it. With his back leaning on the window, he caught sight of Alec on a seat nearby, fumbling with his phone. He looked deeply focused on whatever appeared on the screen. It was amusing to him, really, how he himself was around Alec's age when he became a werewolf. When his life changed forever. Was it for the better? He wasn't quite sure what his alpha thought of that, but to him there was no doubt he wouldn't trade his place with anyone or for anything in the world. He was also around that age when he fell in love for the first time. The word he'd use to describe it would be euphoric, even though it could also be qualified as ephemeral. He never felt that way with anyone else. Not that he tried to, or that he even had the time to try. Nevertheless, he couldn't stop thinking that she was the one for him, that she had always been the one for him. Hayden Ramiro was her name. She chose to leave Beacon Hills behind and move far from the reoccurring events, anomalies, and shenanigans of that place in order to protect her family, her sister. Their last moments together still replayed in his mind from time to time. He'd picture her hair, her figure, adorable face, and amazing smile, but mostly her voice. Charged with burden, heavy with sorrow, and he especially thought of the way it cracked when she spoke her last words to him. The day of her departure. Be safe, Liam. The young man wondered if she was happy, safe, or even alive for that matter. He found it ironic that she left town looking for safety and stability, only for a worldwide all-out war to blow not long after. No matter, wherever she was, he just hoped she was okay. That was, after all, the best he could do. Chapter 8. Welcome to Beacon Hills. Liam shifted his weight back on his legs. He left his seat and made his way to the front of the bus. He walked by Alec, who was still very much captivated by whatever was on his screen. Scott and Malia contemplating the dark sky in each other's arms. Stiles resting next to Lydia, together holding hands. He stopped and stood next to the driver's seat. He glanced at Derek for a moment, then turned his attention back to the empty road in front of him. How far are we? Not very. We are really close, actually, responded Derek. After a few seconds of silence, he added, how is everyone doing back there? As fine as everyone can do, in hindsight. Derek seemed to regret that last question a bit. And then again, how fine can they really be in hindsight? Considering, well, everything. Both men decided that they didn't have anything left to say or share after that. Liam just stood there awkwardly. Far from it being an unbearably uncomfortable situation, it was still unpleasant nonetheless. And for some reason, the idea of simply returning to his seat felt even more awkward to him. And so, he kept staring at the road. Well, as much of it as the headlights could illuminate at least. Everything else around them was gobbled up by darkness. He hoped for something or someone to come up with a good enough excuse to disrupt that quietude. He didn't have to hope for very long, as that reason came right away. A sign on the side of the road entered the radius of the headlight's gleam. It was a green metal traffic sign, printed in white, with the number 115. How did he make out its color in that dimness? One might wonder. Simply put, the Highway 115 was known as the only way back into Beacon Hills. No, this wasn't the only reason that sign was so memorable to Liam. A key event took place there, the occurrence that altered the entire course of all of their lives. A bitter taste built up in the back of his mouth at the thought of that. That was where everything went downhill. He looked over his shoulder and caught sight of Scott. He watched as the true Alpha's face slightly but gradually contorted from relatively peaceful to plainly sad when he laid eyes on the sign. Because after all, whatever it meant to all of them wasn't even close to what it meant to their leader. Scott's mind flashed back to the senior scribe night, the eve of his first day as a senior at Beacon Hills High. He rode his motorcycle on Highway 115 to pick his then-girlfriend Kira Yukimura up, who was coming back from New York with her parents. Their car was stuck in traffic. An accident caused a pile-up ahead of them. The young wolf was beating himself up at the thought that, had he gotten to her before the Dread Doctors got their hands on her, none of them would be in the situation they were in that day. Kira being a Thunder Kitsune was a major part of those abominations' plan from the get-go. All they had to do was tamper with her fox. And with that, all the dominoes aligned. They botched the pack's visit to Icon, stalled Dr. Valek's third eye, which allowed them to carry their experiments to success, yielding a lot of victims in the process. But that wasn't all. Oh no, that was but the beginning. They also botched their second visit to Icon during the mission to save Lydia, causing Odin's hunt, which was already in Beacon Hills, to be stuck there. The pack therefore had to push against the wild hunt through their second semester of senior year. That resulted yet again in another catastrophe, since they allowed an ancestral monster, Anuk-ite, to escape the hunt and cause mayhem by kickstarting a worldwide war led by one of the surviving victims of the Beast of Givaudan. If only, and only if, he'd gotten to her first, she would probably still be with them that day, with her best friends and family. And instead, she was roaming the deserts with skinwalkers, under the sun and the dust. Liam could only imagine the guilt his alpha must feel. He hated the fact that there was nothing he could do or say to make it better, telling him that there was no way he could have known would surely not amount to anything, and here we are. A bit startled, Liam turned towards Derek. He'd almost forgotten that he was still standing next to him. He conveyed his attention forward. Another sign lied ahead. This time, however, it was fashioned from wood, and the letters carved on it said, "Welcome to Beacon Hills." He faintly beamed at the sight of it. Emotions that he thought he'd never feel again suddenly flooded him. He'd already anticipated the reunion with his family and best friend when he learned that they had to go back home. Except then, it felt real. It felt real. It was really happening. His contentment was swiftly cut short, and his heart fell in the pit of his stomach when a humanoid silhouette erupted from the darkness, still and stiff as a board in the middle of the road, right in front of the bus. Derek reacted quickly. He stepped on the brakes faster than Liam could say, "Holy shit." The rest of the passengers were alerted. They didn't exactly know what the problem was, but they knew enough to understand that something was about to happen, and they soon realized it was nothing good. When they felt the bus abruptly halting, well, trying to halt, judging by the screaming wheels scraping against the tar, plus their bodies being thrown forward so hard they each had to find something stable enough to grip a hold of. Stopping a speedy vehicle dead in its tracks at short notice wasn't going to be without repercussions. Indeed, at such mass, at such velocity, the bus had too much momentum, so much so that its rear end left the ground and thrust it forward, while the front seemed glued to the floor, and it basically flipped upside down on itself. The bus glided and grinded on its top end against the road for the next 10 feet that came ahead, until it finally sat still, and everything went dead quiet. Chapter 9. Venomous. The bus finally stood still, and everything went dead quiet. For a brief while, that is. It was shortly after followed by the burst of a restless commotion, resulting from the agitation of everyone coming to their senses. Scott took a few seconds to overcome the deafening noises thundering in his head. As soon as he did, his brain was met with an overwhelming and searing pain. Then came the sound of broken glass cracking and metal crying underneath people's shoes as they were trying to exit the vehicle. "Scott, are you all right?" His eardrums weren't ready for Malia's voice, especially not from that up close and at that volume. He let out a groan and squeezed his eyes tightly shut. Malia seemed to notice that, so she softened her voice. "Scott, can you stand? We need to get out of here." Stiles and Lydia, we need to take care of them first." That was the first thing that came out of his mouth when he somewhat got his thoughts together. Liam and Derek were closer to them. They got the map. "What about you? Are you—" He added a tad calmer. "I'm fine. All healed. Come on, let's move." She helped her boyfriend hoist himself up then. Together, they headed towards the front of the bus, or what was left of it. The windshield was completely smashed and removed, probably kicked away by either Derek or Liam to make a large door out. Stiles and Lydia were the only two lying unconscious on the side of the road, with Alec and Derek by their sides, checking in on them. Everyone else appeared to have already healed from their injuries, even the rescuees. "How are they?" Scott directed his question at Alec as he drew closer and got down on one knee on Stiles' side. "I think he'll be fine," Alec replied concerning Stiles. He then turned his attention to Derek, who understood what was expected of him. "She'll live," he said about Lydia. The true alpha nodded his head in relief briefly, then slowly stood up. He shined his eyes red to case the area through that darkness. They crashed right at the entrance of town. What a heartwarming welcome, he thought. Other than that, there wasn't much to be said or seen until... "Scott?" Liam's voice arose loud in the night. It caught the attention of every surrounding soul in the surrounding circumference. He was standing behind the metal carcass. His tone held concern and a hint of surprise, if not fear. Scott circled around and approached him cautiously, followed closely by Derek and Alec and others who were near. They thought they'd seen the worst. They thought they'd prepared for the worst. Only, what they were facing, nobody could perceive coming. Not in a million years, because what they saw was nothing like anything they've dealt with before. What Liam was peering at was an 8 feet tall humanoid figure, wearing but its bare skin, colored from head to toe with a sandy brown color, no shoes, no clothes on its body, and long silky black hair on its head. "Guys?" This time it was Malia's voice that called for attention. It yanked them out of their trance, but they went right back into it when they laid eyes on what she was looking at. She was standing behind Scott, fronting a second figure, identical to the first one. Everybody's heads were snapping back and forth between the two creatures, before realizing that a third one had appeared from another side, then a fourth one, all exactly alike, apart from some facial features. "Oh, come on, what now?" whined Alec. "Derek, any ideas?" quizzed Scott, hoping Derek would have a faint idea as to what those were. "Nope, none at all," exclaimed Hale back at him. "Hello? Hi? Do you guys speak?" That was Liam's attempt at a communication with the men. The pack assumed they were male based on their masculine build. The lack of genitalia, however, left room for doubts. "What's going on? You mean, what the hell is this?" snapped Alec back at Liam. Time wasn't abundant to answer many questions. Once confusion settled, fear and apprehension creeped in. They had to prepare in anticipation of a fight. And sure enough, a fight broke out when one of those things pounced so fast that there was no forecasting it. Scott didn't think any creature could move at that speed since Deucalion. They moved between the rescuees in rows, leaving only wind behind to be felt. People started dropping to the floor like flies. Then came the moans and groans of pain. The pack's turn to be attacked came right away. Their first target was Derek. He was immediately and effortlessly pinned to the ground. That sequence allowed them to get even a better look at the supernatural. A body part that wasn't visible before. A thick, long tail was hidden behind their backs when they were standing. But it wasn't just a simple one. It was a scorpion's stinger. And that thing was ready to use it on Derek. If it wasn't for the intervention of Scott, who threw himself on the enemy and pushed him off, they definitely did not want to find out how lethal or venomous it was. The others joined the battle and quickly understood that they were no match. The difference in strength and speed was way too considerable to be comparable. Bodies were slammed, bones were broken, and sizable wounds were open. Within 10 seconds from the start of the confrontation, the pack was incapacitated and out of commission. Scott was being held down by the throat, trying with all his might to break free from its grip. He looked around to catch sight of both Liam and Alec bested, lying senseless on the ground. Malia was the only one still standing, although she seemed to be more focused on dodging their hits, and she was pulling her weight, till the creature did a full-on pirouette and lacerated her with its stinger from left to right across the chest. She dropped on her knees, then face-planted on the tar. Derek was crawling on his elbows in a strive to make distance between him and the scorpion man, face covered in his own blood. The creature seemed to follow slowly behind him. It was in no rush whatsoever. It knew its victim had nowhere to run to. It was practically toying with him and mocking him. For Scott to watch his friends get treated that way felt much more painful than his throat being crushed by a monster twice his size. It felt surreal, almost like watching a movie sequence in slow motion. Yet the worst part of it all was when he looked in the direction where Stiles and Lydia were lying. He saw one of them standing over the banshee's head, ready to snuff her out of existence. "No, wait, stop!" he screamed. It didn't react to his voice in any shape. It continued like it was made for the only purpose to take Lydia's life. A blaring loud noise rattled the place. It sounded like the roaring of a motorcycle engine. The mystery was over when a motorbike flew out of the trees and rammed straight into the creature pending over Lydia's body. The biker then landed her vehicle and without skipping a beat, picked a shotgun and shot the supernatural holding Scott down right through the heart. She immediately flipped around and did the same with the creature threatening Derek. She was a perfect shot. She finished the job, and once the menace was no more, she walked towards Scott and lent him a hand. He just froze there, looking back up at her. She reached for her helmet to remove it. "Need a hand?" she asked. She turned out to be someone he knew very well. It was Braden? He finally took her hand and picked himself up. "Yep, that's me." She stopped speaking, took a look around, and an air of confusion appeared on her face. She stared back at Scott and asked, where the hell is Parrish?" Chapter 10. Allies and Enemies. "It looks very abandoned," said the young African-American woman right after stepping out of a car, shutting the door without as much as a look behind her back. Her full attention was directed towards the abandoned mansion before her eyes. It wasn't falling apart by any means, though it had clearly been deserted a long time ago. A few years at least, it appeared. "Of course it does, and it is." The woman whom just gave a reply marked a few seconds' break, then she spoke again. "Monroe, isn't it?" She didn't wait for an answer. She just turned around, started walking towards the house, and added, "Well then, follow me." Monroe picked up the trail, followed by the 3 young men that stepped out of the car with her. They entered the cold, dusty, and unfurnished property. It was a large manor. They thought it must have looked stunning once upon a time, when it was inhabited by an ordinary family, supposing there ever was a plain family to settle in such place. The hunters weren't there to visit the estate, however. The woman guided them straight towards the levels below. The basement would have been as unremarkable as any other if it wasn't for the giant hole in one of the walls. "This is it?" Monroe asked. "You were expecting something else?" "Not at all. In fact, this is perfect. For the moment being, at least." The huntress took a walk around and perused the place for anything that caught her eyes. "What are you planning on doing with the place?" the guide asked. "Never mind my plans. How about you tell me how a woman like you came across a place like this?" Monroe's question sounded almost like a provocation. "A woman like me? I'm not sure I like the sound of that very much. Frankly, what you like or dislike isn't really on my list of priorities." The silence after that was one of the most uncomfortable out there. So much so that seconds felt as long as minutes. It seemed as though without a swift intervention, the meeting would have quickly gone south. "It looks like it has a pretty heavy and rough history." One of the 3 men accompanying Monroe spoke up, an attempt at interrupting the unpleasantness they were plunged into. As awkward and lacking in confidence as it was, it at least had the merit of grabbing the lady's attention. "So you do have a voice. I was starting to think that you were here just for show," the guide replied in an amused tone, almost a taunting one. She walked around for some, trying to find the words to capture what she felt about the place. Well, at least that was what she seemed to be doing. "Yes, a heavy and very rough history, yes. That's exactly how I would describe its history," she continued in a much calmer and hushed voice. "If you put your ears to the walls, you could almost hear the cries of the tormented souls once held within this place." "People? Humans?" he asked with a hint of anger and disgust that he was trying to contain. "Yes, humans. Now here's the part that might kick you in the balls. They were tormented not by supernaturals, but by humans just like them." A look of confusion possessed their faces. She clearly was hinting at something. They weren't sure what, but whatever it was, they had the feeling that they weren't going to enjoy it. Her, on the other hand, looked satisfied, just as if she got the reaction she was yearning for from them. "Yeah, that's right. Sometimes we forget that humans can act like monsters as well." At that point, she was back to moving around the basement again, slowly walking towards the shelves. "Yeah, we already have a system made to punish humans for their crimes," he replied. "That we do. Those criminals, however, no human was able to stop. I'm still wondering to this day how that bunch of little runts managed to do it." Her timbre gradually shifted flavor from soft and amused to dark and resentful. "What bunch of runts?" quizzed Monroe. "You know them. You fought them. In fact, you came close to killing their leader." Monroe thought for a second before it clicked in her mind. "McCall?" "Yeah, him. And his back have been a serious pain in my ass a while back." "Sounds like we're on common grounds," smiled Monroe. "Well, yes, we do. Too bad, though. It couldn't work between us." The atmosphere switched once again at the sound of those words. "Aren't you jumping the gun?" asked the second guy from the group. What makes you think we're not gonna get along? Monroe was trying to remain as calm as possible. Don't ask me. The problem won't come from me. In this alliance, it will come from you. At some point. Monroe slowly brought her hand to the side. She seemed to be catching on to what the woman was hinting at. She felt the danger, and she knew she'd have to protect herself, but not so fast, darling. Honestly, I'll always be amazed by the number of amateurs who believe their own hype. I mean, you don't really think it's gonna be that easy, or do you? Chapter 11. Lost and Found. Parrish was coming home from a long night shift. He worked for longer hours than the rest of the department for obvious reasons. Not that he was forced to. It's just that he felt the obligation to do more, to work harder. He, however, still needed to rest nonetheless, hellhound or not. He dropped his entire weight on the couch. His eyes lingered from the wall facing him up towards the ceiling. He took a lengthy breath, held it for a few seconds, then let it out in an extended exhale. He brought his hand to his face and rubbed his eyes simultaneously with his thumb and index. If that wasn't a sign of exhaustion, nothing else could qualify as such. He thought there was no time to be wasted. He got up, all the while pulling his badge off his chest and putting it on the table near. He started unbuttoning his uniform blouse and heading towards the shower. His plans were to clean up, sleep some, 1 or 2 hours at most, and go back out there. Not much difference from his routine. He saw absolutely no reason that night should be divergent. Well, those plans were cut short when midway out of the living room, the TV screen lit up on its own accord. He immediately froze and gave his entire attention to the occurrence. He just kept standing there and staring at it, waiting for anything else to happen, not knowing what to expect. Jordan was a hellhound. He lived in a world filled with werewolves, banshees, wendigos, and whatever the hell else was out there. All of which he got to accept. TVs turning themselves on, however, he wasn't very sure what to make of it, especially with the car radio incident he had earlier that same night. Whatever the explanation, he wasn't going to get it by standing still and gaping at it intensively. He took a few cautious steps forward and stopped again once close to the device. He tried listening, thinking that a voice might come through the statics, just like the radio, that maybe he could hear the voice calling for him again. Alas, no one's voice came out, so the deputy decided there was no use to the pursuit of a clarification right then. He reached for the switch button to turn the TV off. When he pushed it, the screen went black as fast as it lit up. And if it wasn't for the bright moonlight shining through the window, he would have never noticed the reflection of a silhouette standing behind him. Parrish didn't squander a second and flipped around himself to catch sight and hopefully identify the intruder before it vanished in a puff of smoke and leave him to question his sanity. Kind of like every other bizarre thing that happened that night. Usually he'd have his gun pulled and pointed at the target already. Not for this case, however. This time he felt deep in his core a sense of safety. He sensed that whoever that individual was, they didn't mean any harm. That they were a friend. Well, that she was a friend. One look at her and he immediately knew it was her voice that came through the radio. He just knew. We're not supposed to be here. She steered him out of his thoughts when she broke the pending silence. What do you mean? You have to find me. Tonight. A lot of people will die if you don't, she replied to his question. You're a banshee. His intonation was somewhere between a question and a statement. Come find me. How do I do that? You are a harbinger of death. You know what to do. Spare me time then. Just tell me where you are, he begged. Time. Yes, I don't have much time left. She looked down towards her abdomen area and his eyes followed. You're injured. He could easily tell from the huge circle of blood staining her snow-white dress. In the woods. You know where. She uttered those last words in a distant whisper, a breath almost like she was moving further and further away from him then. The TV went back on again, the sound of static consuming the room, and that's when Parrish woke up from the nap he wasn't even aware he was taking. He was still on the couch. Turned out, it was all a dream. But just like Lydia, he knew too well not to take it too lightly. He didn't know who she was, or what she meant, but one thing about her was for sure. She was reaching out to him for help. Jordan jumped out of his seat, picked up his badge and keys on the way out, hopped in his car and drove away. In the woods. Could she be a bit more specific? God, I'll never find her like this. The Beacon Hills Preserve was a vast land. If he had any chance of finding her, he was going to have to rely on his supernatural side. He had to let it take over, even if just for a short while. When it came to fighting enemies, he did that multiple times. It was becoming a habit. Though when it came to his supernatural GPS skills, Parrish did that once to find Lydia, but that felt different. He didn't remember how he did it, and it was a lot easier because she was right next to the Nematon. He didn't fully have faith in his ability yet. He didn't fully have faith in his abilities just yet, and he was beating himself up for not realizing that sooner and working on it. It was too late for that. He couldn't focus. His thoughts were all over the place. Her words were playing back in his mind like a broken record. If you don't find me, a lot of people will die. I wish Lydia was here. This is her specialty. Yes, Lydia. What would she have done? How did she do it? He was rummaging through his head for a solution, a memory that could be of use to him then. For some reason, only one came through to the surface. It was that of a conversation he had with Lydia back in the summer when she was helping him figure out what creature he was. So how do you do it? How do you always find the bodies before anyone even realizes these people are missing? Parrish had asked. Most of the time, I don't know what I'm doing, or even that I'm doing it. It just started happening after I was bitten. I thought you had to be born a banshee. You can't be given that power by a bite, he had replied. Yes, I came to find out that it runs in the family. The power was always dormant. It was always in me. Peter just brought it out with the bite, explained Lydia. But there has to be a common denominator, a constant element in the way you always find the bodies. Lydia took a few seconds to reply. She'd appeared to be considering something then. Well, now that you mention it, I think every time it happened, it did while I was driving or sitting next to the driver. He kept looking at her, waiting for more. He could tell from the look on her face that she had a lot more to say about it. It happened many times, but the first time I was conscious about it was when me and Kira were trying to help Malia with her driving. I told her to take a turn, convinced it would take us to school. Then Kira pointed out we were heading downtown. That's when I knew I was doing it, and that we had to keep going that way. So it just happens, and no way to know how or when. There was this once where I was sure the GPS was on, and I was just following it. But then Aiden told me that the GPS was off all the time. GPS? Yes. In my mind I was following the indication of the GPS, she said. Parrish glanced at the GPS, hoping it would happen to him and that somehow he would hear its voice. He clinged to the steering wheel, his breathing accelerated. He was losing his cool. He needed to focus. There was a lot on the line. So many lives. He didn't have the right to screw it up. I can do this. I can. He uttered those encouragement words to himself. Then closed his eyes for 2 seconds. The car was still moving, not slowing down. In fact, it was picking up speed as he went. When he opened them, they were both glowing in a radiant warm orange tone, like they were the gates to hell, and those gates were about to open. He handed complete control of his body over to his powers. He knew he'd need to stay conscious, but just enough to know what was going on around him. He felt his muscles relaxing, his seat beneath him, the air around him, kind of like he was hypnotizing himself. The deputy felt a sudden change in direction. He was making a turn. It was working. Hopefully he would not be late or else. That dynamic continued for over 10 minutes. He eventually left his car behind and kept going on foot. He picked up his pace. Very soon he began to run through the woods. There was no stopping him. Well, there was, once he reached the person he was looking for. Parrish finally did. He found her, found Malia, the banshee that spoke to Lydia. Her state was deplorable, curled up against a tree to shelter herself from the harsh cold wind.